This is, I think, my first time I'm getting to teach or speak about my real passion, which is, in one word, wisdom. So thank you, Gaudiya, for
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
What do you think about Kongzi?
So the first time I started reading classical philosophy was, I was 16 years old. I mostly focused on Aristotle, but I did read Confucius in high school, just a little bit. Confucius is famous for several works, but the most famous one is called the Analects. So in English, the main lesson from the Analects, we translate as the doctrine of the mean, or Zhongyong Jidang. And I'll also be talking about the middle way, which is the same teaching, but that's from the Buddha. And the same teaching has also come from Aristotle. We call it the golden mean. And finally, Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita defines yoga as the middle way, as the same teaching. Before I start reading from these ancient texts, we should say a quick prayer to Vasudeva. That's the only prayer I know. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. This has been passed down for thousands of years. So saying just a few words is the absolute minimum, I think, required. So let's start with Confucius. This is Book 6, verse 29 in Yunyu. The master said, "Attaining a balance all the time in practical matters and in everyday life, is this virtue not the best? For so long now, it has been rare to find it among the common people." So as far as I know, in this entire text, this one verse is the only time we see the phrase zhongyong. I'm personally fascinated by Chinese language, but I won't get into the details of that because I'm a foreigner and it's strange for me to do that. But I will say, out of all these disciplines, the Buddhist, Krishna and Aristotle and Confucius, this term in Chinese is, I think, the best linguistic term to express this wisdom. Okay, let's move on to the Buddha. Okay, first I'll tell a story from the Buddha's life. Before the Buddha reached enlightenment, he was very hungry for it, and he would try hundreds of different gurus and doctrines and disciplines. At one point, he was fasting very severely, very austerely, almost to the point of death. He was on the bank of a river. A little girl, this is a very poor village, and a very small girl, she is herself starving, but she came over to offer him a bowl of rice, because she could see that this man was starving even more than she was. The first response from the Buddha was, "No, I cannot, because I've made this commitment to stay strong to my fast." But he noticed on a boat in front of him along the river, there was a music lesson. So the student plays a note, doesn't sound very good. The teacher says, "Okay, I think we need to tighten the string." So the student tightens the string way too much, hits it, ding, and it still doesn't sound good. And finally, the teacher says again, "All right, let's tighten it a little less, a little more towards the middle." So the student follows the teacher, plays the note, and it, of course, sounds beautiful. It was in this moment that Buddha realized what he called the middle way. His excessive hunger for enlightenment was causing disturbances to his body and also to the social world around him. He was being quite rude to reject the generosity of this young girl. So the middle way is kind of the foundation for Buddhist thought, and once you kind of are along the middle way long enough, eventually you start the Eightfold Path. Okay, so now I'll read what the Buddha himself said during his first sermon. Monks, these two extremes ought not to be practiced by one who has gone forth from the household life. There is addiction to indulgence of sense pleasures.
那实际上这个是对感官享乐的一种执迷。
Which is low, coarse, means rough, the way of ordinary people, unworthy and unprofitable. And there is addiction to self-mortification.
Mortification is
Actually it means death, but like extreme austerity, you know.
another side.
The other side of extreme religiousness. From this self-mortification, he calls it, this is painful, unworthy, and unprofitable. So that's the middle way, according to Buddhism, which focuses primarily on how monks should find and follow the middle way. Moving on to Aristotle. Aristotle was my first master, actually. When I first read the first page of Aristotle, it was almost an out-of-body experience for me. Everything made sense perfectly and instantly. And I knew it was from so long ago, so I couldn't explain it. So at 16 years old, I declared in my heart, at least, Aristotle would be my master until I found Bhagavad Gita at 25. So this golden mean that Aristotle talks about is actually much more sophisticated and, not sophisticated, but dynamic or extensive. It applies not just to religion, like Buddha talks about, and not just to social and ordinary things like Confucius talks about. He applies it to everything. Okay, so I'm going to read a few verses from Aristotle, but the book and verse I quote is actually from my book, because Aristotle's text, it's a conversation, and I took the conversation and turned it into a Bible, basically. Aristotle is the great-grandfather of everything in the West. Science, politics, economics, and everything.
So he's from the Greek.
Greece.
Ancient.
You may not know of Aristotle, but you probably know of his student, Alexander, who conquered most of the world without losing a single battle. Alexander did not come to China. He didn't go that far east, but he came to India and Persia and most of the world. All right, now I'll read some verses. Chapter 2, verse 4.
Chapter 2, verse 4. 第二章第4节。
Virtue is a mean between extremes, much like diet and exercise. Virtue, and indeed almost all of our consciousness, is usually moderated by pleasures and pains. I'll just read the next verse that explains it. In the virtue of bravery, for instance, if one stands firm against terrifying situations and enjoys it, or at least does not find it painful, one is brave. If one finds it painful, one is cowardly. So this is one of the great things from Aristotle, which I don't see in the other ones, is kind of the psychology of how to find the middle condition in our lives, using pleasure and pain. Aristotle mentions about a dozen virtues of character, like bravery, generosity, what's another good one? Temperance, that's controlling what you eat, and sex and sleep.
Temperance.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, one thing unique from Aristotle is he showed us how the golden mean, the middle way, is normally not exactly in the middle. It's not 50%, maybe it's 60 or 40. It's not exactly in the middle. For example, in generosity, which is a virtue Chinese people are very good at, I think, if you have to choose between being too generous or not generous enough. It's better to be a little bit too generous. Similar with
这个是
bravery,
中庸之道，是要靠近那边，包括勇敢也是如此。
especially for men. If you're a little bit too brave and you're called rash, that's better than being not brave enough and being called a coward. That's very... And then one thing that's really missing from Aristotle is, well, he never talks about women, the virtues of women. It's very much for men. Also, Aristotle focuses on the material world and not at all the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, humility is much more important than bravery. In the first verse, he mentions diet and exercise. These are really crystal clear examples in the mundane world where too much is bad and too little is also bad. If you eat too much, you're fat. If you don't eat enough, you can starve and die. All right, I think now we can move on to the Bhagavad Gita.
Okay, wait a second. Let me make a review of your what you say.
Okay, I actually also want to review.
Yeah.
First, just the timeline, the history of this, real quick. Confucius was first, 2,500 years ago. Then Buddha, 100 years later. Then Aristotle, 100 years after the Buddha. It's about the same time though.
Okay. And then I also want to reveal that about the middle part of the Aristotle is a little bit over than middle, not 100%, 50%.
It depends on each virtue, but he's saying it's not an exact science, because this is the science of action, which is never exact, but it'll typically lean
It's
closer
like
towards
psychology feelings, kind of stuff. It may give people different feelings.
Maybe psychology is not the best word. It's action. Well, he focuses on character. So first you find the right way to act, then you repeat the act, it's a habit, and you keep the habit for 2 or 3 years, then it's your character. It's stable.
Okay, that's another topic. Well, I just want to elaborately make people understand why we say that the middle way of the brave and the coward is not exactly 50%, and better go a little bit, go close to the brave.
This is what I was trying to say earlier, where there's a cultural problem here. So Aristotle's work is geared towards Western men, like Alexander, who was a conqueror. That's the ideal student for him. Whereas a Chinese woman it doesn't work with a lot of these virtues. Like bravery is kind of irrelevant.
We have, but not necessarily the same.
I do have another example.
他说还有另外一个例子。
So for generosity, this is the virtue for wealth. Virtue for wealth means we not only need to do the right thing, but we need to do it in the right way, for the right reasons. The right attitude for wealth is to spend and to give, not to keep and to take.
The Chinese people all reserve money in the bank. You know that?
Yeah, but I still think Chinese are very generous, because at least with friends and family, when you go out to dinner and stuff, they're ready to just take care of the problem. They're ready to give.
Yeah, I'm joking actually. Although
The idea is just we want to get ourselves better at aiming where the ideal is, and it typically will help us to avoid one extreme. It'll help us a little bit more. I can give you one more example if you want.
yes, more we need more.
The virtue of temperance is the virtue for bodily pleasures. Food, sex, sleeping. Our nature, universally for all of us, leads us more towards pleasure, more towards excess food, excess sex, excess sleeping, etc. That natural tendency, we need to be ready to go against it, because the golden mean, the middle condition, will be closer to the other extreme. Of course, we have to eat and we have to sleep, but if we have to choose between eating too much or eating too little, we should go more towards too little. Okay, move on to Bhagavad Gita.
He
There's
asked, what's the percentage of the golden mean? I say,
62.
but
There-
people say, oh,
It's not exact, but why we call it the golden mean is because it relates to geometry and math.
yeah.
Do you know the golden ratio?
Yeah, I know that. Golden.
1.61815 and so on. You can see it in our ear.
This
You can look at your finger.
This
This
is
is like
also-
60% and 40%. It's not exact, but it's like an inside joke. So this mathematical proportion is in nature. You
Yeah,
can
but
see
is
it
that
everywhere.
also from Aristotle? That's from another.
It's way more ancient. That's ancient Egypt. That's even farther back. I want to get to the practical questions later about, how we can actually use this in our own lives. So let's finish it up with Krishna and the Bhagavad Gita, which is much older, 5,000 years ago. Chapter 2, verse 48. Krishna defines yoga explicitly. He says this is yoga. Be steadfast in yoga, O Arjuna. Perform your duty and abandon all attachment to success or failure. Such evenness of mind is called yoga. For me, Krishna and the Bhagavad Gita is transcendental to everything else. It's not even in the same, we call, ballpark, as the other philosophers and sages we've been talking about. It's important to note, Krishna specifically mentions success or failure here. At least for Aristotle, the middle way, the golden mean, is a means to an end. We're striving for success. But Krishna says here, even success itself, we don't want. We want something between that and failure. So at least for me, when I think about the middle way, Zhongyong, I think there's actually two. One is for the material world, where the middle condition helps us to find success, and then Krishna's definition, where we don't want success. We want something else, something beyond. The teaching part is over. Now I'd like to get into coaching, which is more like doing it. How to actually use this wisdom in our lives. I think the easiest thing is to start with the most mundane things, like eating and sleeping. So for eating, we know in general, across our whole day, across our whole life, there's three different paths. We can eat too much, too little, or in the middle. And we can zoom in a bit and say, in one meal, we can eat too much, too little, or in the middle. So, especially for me as an English teacher with sometimes 50 students in a class, I will sometimes purposely eat too much before class because going a little bit to excess in that way is justified because I'm going to be working a lot. And of course, on the weekend, when I don't teach at all, if I have to choose between eating too much or too little, I go more to too little. Those two distinctions, sometimes I go more too much, sometimes I go more too little. It's because in general, I'm always going towards the middle, across the more zoomed out perspective. And I'll zoom in one level deeper.
然后我再往里面更深入一层去分析。
Within one meal, we can say too much, too little, or in the middle amount for the salt, the sugar, tomatoes. We can get very precise if we want to. You can apply this basic process to every part of your life, to your daily routines, to your spiritual life, your spiritual practice, relationships, everything you want, where you look for too much, too little, and in the middle, zoom out, zoom in, that's all.
What's the help? What's the benefit, please?
That's, well, Krishna would say, we're not doing this to get a benefit. It's dharma.
You just analyze without benefit.
Because it's the right thing to do. So, I mean, how should I respond as Aristotle or the Buddha or Krishna? They have a different flavor with how they'll respond, right? Aristotle will say, we do the right thing because we enjoy it, because we have pleasure for it, and because it's fine. It means noble. Or
1 second, let me translate now.
I bounce between Aristotle and Krishna. That's the only ones I use.
Okay, so let's start.
So Krishna would say, we find the middle condition so that our consciousness is able to go back to Him, to get bhakti or to go back to Godhead, basically.
To get a self-realization.
When we're mixed up, when we're doing too much or too little, when we don't have balance, we don't have the stability and calmness and peace. It's to get peace. Once we have peace in ourselves, then we can start really approaching God and sadhus and sages. And
Yes.
in final summary, what's different about this is the number 3. So a lot of times in our natural state, we might say, I want this, so I go get this. That's one. We have one thing in our mind and we just go to that one thing.
So 3 steps. You mentioned about first step now. You say 3.
It's not a step.
3 things.
So in our consciousness, there's typically one thing we're going after. So let's just start there. There's typically, you see something, you want it, you go get it. That's number 1.
Natural.
That's the natural state, is just one pointed.
Okay.
The next level of discernment, you might say, or evolution of consciousness, is seeing 2 things. You see something you want and you go, oh, I want that. Oh, maybe I don't. Maybe something's better. It's this or that. You have 2 things, this or that. The only way to see the middle way is when you have 3 things. This or that, and then in the middle also. My psychology master says we can only choose. We actually don't have any freedom. We don't have any free choice until we have 3 choices. If we have just one choice, it's not a choice. If we have 2 choices, we can just study which one is best and then take it. But when we have 3 or more, then we are free. We can actually choose and be free in our life. Okay, so that's it for me. I don't want to say any more. I want to take questions. And ideally how this can work is if people can just say whatever something they might be struggling with, literally anything, and you and I can help them find the triad, the 3 conditions. Too much, too little, and then in the middle. J-O-N-T, don't be shy. Seriously, it can be the smallest, mundane thing. It can be anything. It's just an exercise in how to think.
How can I find this middle way in family?
Oh, perfect. Good, perfect example.
这是一个很好的案例。
The primary feeling for family, I'd say, is care. So we can care too much, care too little, or in the middle. You could also think about it like attachment. If we're too attached to our family, we kind of smother them. And if we're too detached, maybe they think we don't love them. So that's just my first thought in as general as I can possibly be. So if that sounds accurate to you in general, say yes, and then we can zoom in more. If not, then we need to keep working.
Okay.
Okay, so now we can
zoom in.
Now we'll zoom in. And I can, of course, speak from experience here. I'm in a family, like everyone else.
You have family? You mean?
Not my own family, but when I was a boy growing up, my mom was too attached to me. She would care too much. All I'm saying is, for boys of a certain age, we really want to, the golden mean is closer to backing off. And for, say, girls of a smaller age, we really want to love them and really care for them.
Okay.
Another way, besides care, we can also talk about discipline. So especially if you're a mother or a father, grandfather, grandmother, you should be ready to discipline your children. You should at least be ready to do that. It's part of your duty. I'll share one example which really terrified me. I actually saw this on CCTV somewhere in China. There was a mom and a daughter at some fast food place, small restaurant. I think all Chinese girls are cute, but this one is very cute.
这个小女孩是特别可爱的，我觉得所有的中国的女孩都很可爱。
This girl maybe 5 years old.
这个小女孩大概5岁大。
She had some French fries. She dropped just a few French fries on the ground. So this is a really small thing. We're talking about equi, right? It's nothing. What does the mother do? And in the end, the girl is flat on the ground, on their stomach. So that's the wrong way to do it.
这个是一个错误的方式，错误的约束孩子的方式。
That's the excess of discipline. But then the other excess is being not disciplining enough. And this also, you have a special word for this in China. I think they call them an emperor's daughter or something. Yeah, spoiled.
Yeah, spoiled.
Yeah. And then in the middle somewhere is our golden mean. That's doing the right discipline at the right time for the right reasons. One more note I'll say. You'll notice I used the most extreme example I could think of for excess discipline. This was so extreme, it really scarred my heart. For a few weeks, I was in a dark place from just watching this on a screen, really. But it's important to really know the most exaggerated extreme, and then the other opposite, most exaggerated extreme, so we can more easily see the middle. And you can really use your imagination here. So the deficiency, that is too little discipline, if you can imagine a child so spoiled that he's pulling on their parents, like the child leads everything, and the parents are now the slaves to the child. And that's of course it's bad, right? So the middle condition is typically hard to see, but the exaggerated examples, they'll help us get to the middle. One more note on discipline, because I'm a teacher, so I have to sometimes discipline my students. There are a few instances this year teaching in the middle school where I got really angry at my students. I insulted, this was 2 or 3 boys. I insulted them, I was very strong with them, and later that day I was thinking, maybe it was too much. Next week I saw these boys, they were very well behaved and very respectful to me. So this means it was right. If it was too much, they would not be respectful. They wouldn't want to look at me. Oh, white job, I hate white job. So a lot of times, especially with people, with other people, we just need to do it and see what happens.
So you say, I completely agree about your viewpoint about this to find the middle way. But precisely I want to ask a question. What about American? It's always criticized about Chinese human rights, these issues. What's your opinion about this?
Great question.
这也是一个很好的问题。
First of all, Aristotle, Krishna, Buddha, Confucius never used the word right. Human rights is very new, only 100, 200 years old. Basically before America, we would typically say justice or injustice. That's how we would talk about it. Rights are it's like an excuse. It's like I really don't like rights, to be honest, because it takes away kind of the science and the wisdom of what actually happens. You say, oh, it's my right, so you need to give it to me. Or it's their right, and you did something bad, so it's bad. It takes away our ability to really look at things clearly. Now, to answer your question more directly, based on what Americans think human rights is China, doing bad things for human rights? Yes. Based on their definition, yes.
Okay.
So in America, we have the First Amendment, free speech, free religion, free assembly. Also free press. So the news has the right to
还有叫做新闻自由。
So from that perspective alone, the Great Chinese Firewall, where in China you can't do Google, YouTube, Facebook, by that measure alone, it's an infraction of a human right.
Okay.
So I'm an American, I'm in China, what am I doing here? I'm in this country that's taking away my rights. Why am I here? Because even though these different things are blocked, China is much closer to the middle way than America most of the time. In America, this happened to me. I've been fired from jobs for saying something they don't like. This is the culture. So in America, they just have it written on a book somewhere that you have to be free speech. But the culture is very restrictive and very excessive. It's not in the middle.
So he was mentioned about that in China, in America, they respect the people's privacy. Property. So that not like in China, when they have to make a rule, they just take away your house. There's many incidents. But America is better. But when China want to build a highway, they can build very fast because the national building go first. Private property goes second. So in this way, the American cannot do better in China. And also, he mentioned about that about the right of having gun. In America, they have the freedom, but there's so many murdering and gunshot. In China, we don't have this freedom, but it's comparatively safer than that. So it's too extreme is not good. Better in the middle way. Too much freedom is also not good.
Yeah, freedom itself is a golden mean, is a triad. You can have too much freedom, too little freedom, and in the middle is best.
I feel in China, you give people a certain degree of the freedom. But in America, it seems like they give too much freedom to the people. What do you feel?
So I'm in China because the social and cultural freedom here is higher than in America. So when I'm teaching, my employer, they don't care. They just say, hey, you teach. You do a good job teaching, we like you. You do a bad job teaching, we don't like you.
They don't talk religion? Don't preach?
No, yeah, they don't care about... They're very free. Very free.
That's the policy. They should say that. They should tell you that.
I'll learn the hard way, maybe. But for the most part, like I said, socially not strict. So I can wear whatever clothes I want. Most people, Chinese people mind their own business. They just don't care about others. So one more note to show how it's a flip image. In America, we have material freedom. We can buy a gun, we can own a house. We have all this material freedom, but psychological and spiritual freedom is very, very low there. So if I want to be a teacher in America, I actually need to act a certain way. It's not enough to be a good teacher. I also need to have certain beliefs and speak a certain way. And I can't use Facebook in a certain way because they track everything. Yeah, it's actually, I think America and China are very similar in many ways. The difference for me is really culture. China has an ancient culture that's rich and been kept forever. America is in the clouds. One year it's this way, another year it's another way, because there's just too much freedom, I guess. No, oh, all right. So part of the material freedom in America means there's many subcultures. So if you find the right town, in the right city, in the right state, it's like, whoa, it's perfect. But then, you drive 10 miles away and it's hell. So this actually happened to me. So where I went to school, college, very north near Canada, beautiful place. It's still one of my favorite places in the world for nature. And it's very free and it's very accepting there. There's many immigrants who come there. But while I was there, in just a few years, it became excessive. There was too much freedom, and then all of a sudden there's madness everywhere. And also, there's a lot of drugs in America. So I'm very grateful for this because I'm very responsible. I know how to take the right drug for the right reason, and I don't have problems. But for most people, it's horrible. I know many friends who died, overdose. America as a political system, I think, is very excellent. The Constitution, how it's written, is beautiful, but it needs a high quality people to work. And over the years, starting with my parents' generation, it's been going. It's really bad. I sometimes, I have trouble talking with my parents because they get so emotional and they're just immature about stuff. I can talk to my middle school students easier, even though they don't speak English.
Political viewpoint, you cannot talk with your parents.
Anything that's different from their own little comfort zone, anything that's different, and they go. I've noticed in China and also India, people here are really good at not giving a shit. Oh, you're from America? Oh, it's okay.
Okay.
Indians especially like this. Oh, you Jewish? You Christian? You Hindu? Bye-bye.
Here is like that.
One guy in India, older man, a little bit older than you, he came to me, he said, just walks right up to me, some stranger. Hey, you married? No, I'm not married. Oh, you're a good looking guy, you should get married, you're stupid. Oh, bye-bye.
Okay. Now it's a little bit late.
Thank you. Thank you.
好，谢谢大家。
谢谢大家。
OK， 好，我们来给一个掌声，谢谢我们的邀请。Thank you.